It was a morning that shook the very foundations of Buckingham Palace and reverberated across the world, sending shockwaves through royal watchers, media outlets, and millions of followers of the monarchy. At precisely 10 a.m., the announcement came. Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana, the children of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, were officially removed from the line of succession. The words were precise, cold, and unyielding. Due to unresolved controversies, the statement read, leaving the public to grapple with a wave of disbelief, anger, and confusion. For centuries, the British monarchy has represented continuity, heritage, and tradition, and yet, in a single stroke, two young children, innocent, unaware, and yet deeply connected to the world's most famous family, were being stripped of the recognition they had been born into. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Even for a family accustomed to headlines, scandals, and the relentless scrutiny of the press, this announcement marked a turning point. It wasn't just about titles, privileges, or ceremonial duties. It was about identity, legacy, and the very concept of royal lineage. For the first time in recent memory, the monarchy had officially severed its recognition of the next generation in a way that transcended gossip columns or sensationalist media stories. And the world wanted answers. What had led to this unprecedented decision? What controversies remained unresolved? And most importantly, what did this mean for the children, their parents, and the monarchy itself? The initial moments after the announcement were chaotic. Social media erupted with speculation, outrage, and conspiracy theories. Headlines screamed across screens worldwide, each more sensational than the last. The king strikes. Archie and Lilibet erased from royal succession. Royal family cuts Sussex children from future lineage. Monarchy makes bold move against Harry and Meghan's children. Experts scrambled to weigh in. Constitutional lawyers debated the legality and implications. Royal historians traced precedents stretching back centuries. And the public, from London to Los Angeles, found themselves grappling with a question that had suddenly become personal. Could a monarchy erase the future of two children simply because of controversies surrounding their parents? To understand the gravity of this moment, one must first comprehend the delicate web of rules, traditions, and expectations that govern royal succession. The line of succession is not merely a formality. It is a structure that determines the future leadership of the United Kingdom and the wider Commonwealth. It is intertwined with centuries of legislation, from the Act of Settlement in 1701 to the Succession to the Crown Act of 2013, designed to balance tradition with evolving societal norms. And while succession has always been a topic of public interest, it has rarely, if ever, intersected with modern controversies in a way this direct. Never before had children born into the family been officially removed due to unresolved issues surrounding their parents' actions, rather than matters of religion, legitimacy, or gender. This decision, therefore, was not only unprecedented, it was historic. Across the Atlantic, the reaction was immediate. Media outlets in the United States, where Harry and Meghan reside, scrambled to report the news. Analysts dissected the language of the announcement. Legal experts speculated on potential avenues for appeal or reversal. And public opinion, always fiercely polarized when it came to the Sussexes, erupted in a mixture of sympathy, outrage, and bewilderment. For supporters of the couple, the move felt cruel, punitive, and emblematic of a monarchy unable to adapt to modern realities. For critics, it was a long overdue assertion of authority, a necessary action to maintain the integrity and image of the royal institution. Yet beyond the headlines and the soundbites, the human story was impossible to ignore. Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana, barely old enough to understand the concept of monarchy or media attention, had suddenly been thrust into the center of a maelstrom. Their parents, often vilified and celebrated in equal measure, were now faced with the ultimate dilemma: protect the children's well-being while navigating a system that had just formally questioned their right to be recognized as future members of the royal family. One can only imagine the private turmoil, the difficult conversations, the late nights spent negotiating between legal teams, advisors, and the unyielding expectations of royalty. Behind the polished cameras and press releases, there was undoubtedly pain, confusion, and an urgent need to reconcile love for their children with the harsh realities of public life. In many ways, the decision reflected a culmination of years of tension between the Sussexes and the rest of the royal family. The couple's departure from official duties in 2020, often referred to as Megxit, had been contentious enough, but it had left unresolved questions about loyalty, influence, and the role of modern celebrity within an ancient institution. Over the years, public statements, interviews, and high-profile projects had amplified these tensions, creating an environment where reconciliation seemed increasingly difficult. And now, with Archie and Lilibet removed from the line of succession, the stakes had shifted entirely. The monarchy was not just asserting authority, it was making a definitive statement about control, legacy, and the consequences of perceived transgressions. Experts in royal affairs quickly pointed out that such decisions are rarely made lightly. The palace operates with a careful balance of symbolism, legality, and public perception. Removing children from succession is not merely a personal judgment. It is a calculated message, intended both for the family and for the world. It signals the limits of tolerance, the boundaries of behavior considered acceptable, and the lengths to which the monarchy will go to protect its image and traditions. It also raises questions about fairness, ethics, and the psychological impact on those directly affected. How does one reconcile centuries-old protocols with the modern values of empathy, inclusivity, and family unity? The tension between tradition and progress, authority and compassion, was now laid bare for all to see. As discussions swirled in media studios, on social media platforms, and in private conversations around the globe, analysts began exploring the potential implications for the monarchy itself. Could this move strengthen the institution by demonstrating that rules and standards apply equally to all members, regardless of popularity or public opinion? Or could it backfire, creating a perception of rigidity, cruelty, or outdated authority, especially in an era when royal approval is increasingly measured by public sentiment rather than historical precedent? Scholars and commentators debated not only the immediate legal ramifications, but also the long-term effects on public trust, institutional relevance, and the monarchy's ability to adapt to a rapidly changing world. Meanwhile, the public's fascination with the Sussexes ensured that the story would not fade quickly. Every detail was scrutinized, from the phrasing of the official announcement, to the timing, to potential behind-the-scenes meetings between the king, Prince William, and senior advisors. Rumors of private negotiations, confidential letters, and undisclosed evidence circulated with dizzying speed. Social media users speculated on whether the children's removal might be reversed in the future or whether it represented a permanent fracture within the family. The narrative was evolving in real time, with new angles, leaks, and expert commentary emerging by the hour. And yet, amid all this scrutiny, one question persisted above all others. How would this decision affect the children themselves? While discussions of tradition, legality, and public perception dominate headlines, the human impact remains deeply personal. Archie and Lilibet may be young, but the implications of this announcement will shape their understanding of identity, family, and belonging. Their parents, navigating both public condemnation and private grief, face the extraordinary challenge of shielding them from a world eager to dissect every emotional response. It is a delicate balance, one that underscores the often overlooked reality of life inside the most famous family in the world. The stakes are not just public, they are intensely, profoundly personal. As we explore the full story in this video, we will dive into the announcement itself, the royal family's reasoning, and the intricate history of succession that makes such decisions so consequential. We will examine the reactions from the public, experts, and global media. We will look at the potential implications for the monarchy, for Harry and Meghan, and for their children's futures. Along the way, we will uncover the human stories that lie beneath the headlines, the emotions, the conflicts, and the private struggles that are rarely seen by the public eye. By the end, you will have a full understanding of why this announcement is more than just news. It is a historic, unprecedented moment that challenges tradition, questions loyalty, and forces the royal family and the world to confront the delicate intersection of legacy, power, and family. The morning air in London was crisp, carrying with it a sense of anticipation that few could explain, and yet those within the palace walls understood all too well. At 10 a.m., the press release hit every major news outlet simultaneously. It was succinct, precise, and unflinching. The language was deliberately formal, almost clinical, yet beneath the veneer of protocol lay a statement that would reverberate across continents. Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana were officially removed from the line of succession. For some, the words were shocking. For others, they were the culmination of years of tension, scandal, and speculation. But regardless of one's perspective, the impact was immediate and profound. Inside Buckingham Palace, aides scurried to manage the immediate fallout. Senior members of the royal household coordinated with press officers, ensuring that every word and nuance of the announcement was controlled and consistent. Rumors of prior briefings to select members of the press turned out to be unfounded. The decision was sudden, calculated, and absolute. There was no room for negotiation, no hint of compromise. This was a definitive statement from King Charles, who had taken personal responsibility for the wording, ensuring that it reflected both authority and the uncompromising weight of tradition. As the statement circulated, journalists around the globe dissected every word. Due to unresolved controversies, became the focal point of debates, with commentators speculating about the exact nature of these controversies. Some suggested legal complications, others hinted at personal disputes, and a few pointed to previous interviews and media appearances by the Sussexes as evidence of behavior deemed inconsistent with royal expectations. The phrasing was deliberately ambiguous, a tactic designed to assert authority without revealing sensitive details. This ambiguity only fueled the fire of speculation, allowing media outlets, experts, and the public to fill in the blanks with their interpretations. Social media erupted within minutes. Hashtags trended in multiple countries, each vying to capture the mood of a global audience that was suddenly fixated on a family's private decisions. Hashtag Sussex children removed dominated timelines, while others opted for more emotional expressions. Hashtag Archie and Lilibet innocent, hashtag royal family scandal, and hashtag monarchy rules unfair. Memes, threads, and live commentaries spread faster than any official response could be managed, demonstrating the enormous power of public discourse in the digital age. Even for a monarchy used to scrutiny, the scale and intensity of the reaction were unprecedented. Legal experts, historians, and constitutional scholars were called upon to provide insight. Analysts debated the authority of King Charles to remove children from succession in this manner, referencing historical precedents that were often centuries old. One commentator noted that while adjustments to succession rules had occurred before, they typically involved religious considerations or legislative changes, not personal or behavioral controversies involving living descendants. Others examined the potential implications for the monarchy's reputation, questioning whether such a move could be perceived as a necessary assertion of authority or an overreach that might alienate the public. The conversation was complex, nuanced, and often contradictory, reflecting the unprecedented nature of the announcement. The public response was equally multifaceted. Supporters of Harry and Meghan expressed outrage, portraying the decision as punitive, unfair, and emblematic of a rigid, outdated institution unable to adapt to contemporary values. Letters to editors, online petitions, and social media campaigns called for reconsideration, emphasizing the innocence of the children and the importance of separating their lives from the controversies surrounding their parents. Conversely, critics of the Sussexes framed the decision as a long overdue action, necessary to uphold the integrity of the monarchy and to send a clear message that titles and privileges were not to be taken lightly or abused. The polarization was intense, reflecting broader societal debates about tradition, authority, and accountability. Within the palace itself, the atmosphere was tense. Senior advisors were aware of the potential ramifications not only for the immediate family, but also for public perception, diplomatic relations, and the broader Commonwealth. Meetings were held behind closed doors, with discussions spanning everything from media strategy to potential contingency plans for further fallout. The King's private counsel emphasized the importance of controlling the narrative, ensuring that the official framing was consistent, authoritative, and unambiguous. Every detail, from the timing of press releases to the wording used in interviews, was scrutinized, reflecting the extraordinary stakes involved in a decision of this magnitude. For Harry and Meghan, the news was devastating. While they had faced scrutiny, criticism, and public debates before, this crossed a line into the very identity of their children. The couple was reportedly blindsided by the timing, though not necessarily by the substance, as tensions with the palace had been building for years. Immediate reactions were private, marked by urgency, grief, and strategic planning. Legal teams were contacted, advisors consulted, and family members informed, all while grappling with the personal implications of a decision that directly affected the lives of their children. Across the Atlantic, in California, the announcement was met with disbelief and concern. Interviews with friends, colleagues, and supporters of the couple reflected both sympathy and a sense of urgency. Questions arose about how Harry and Meghan would respond, both publicly and privately, and what measures they might take to protect their children. The global nature of the monarchy ensured that the story was not confined to the United Kingdom. It had immediate resonance in the United States, Australia, Canada, and across Europe, making it one of the most widely reported royal developments in decades. This chapter of the story also highlighted the evolving role of media in shaping public perception. Unlike past generations, where royal decisions might have been managed primarily through official channels, the digital age demanded real-time engagement. Social media platforms amplified reactions, commentary, and speculation, while traditional news outlets competed for exclusivity and insight. The intersection of modern media with centuries-old traditions created a dynamic tension, one that required careful navigation to prevent misinterpretation or escalation. Ultimately, the announcement served as a stark reminder of the monarchy's power and its capacity to make decisions with far-reaching consequences. It also underscored the vulnerability of those caught in the crossfire, most notably, the children themselves. Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana were more than names on a succession list. They were individuals with families, identities, and futures suddenly subjected to public scrutiny and institutional judgment. The removal from succession was not merely a procedural matter. It was a deeply symbolic act, one that sent a message about expectations, behavior, and the consequences of crossing perceived boundaries within one of the world's most enduring institutions. As the hours turned into days, the ripple effects of the announcement continued to unfold. Analysis, speculation, and emotional responses poured in from every corner of the globe. For supporters, it was a moment of profound injustice. For critics, a necessary measure. For Harry and Meghan, it was a deeply personal crisis that intersected with public accountability, media scrutiny, and the protective instincts of parenthood. And for the monarchy itself, it was a calculated assertion of authority, a signal that rules and expectations remain paramount, even in an era defined by transparency, celebrity influence, and evolving societal norms. By the end of the first day, it was clear that this announcement would not be a fleeting headline. It would become a defining moment in the ongoing narrative of Harry and Meghan, a benchmark against which future actions would be measured, and a case study in the delicate balance between tradition, authority, and personal freedom. The removal of Archie and Lilibet from the line of succession was more than news. It was a seismic event that redefined expectations, reshaped public discourse, and set the stage for a series of events that would continue to captivate, shock, and divide audiences worldwide. The moment Harry received the official notification, he felt as though the floor had shifted beneath him. The crisp, formal language of the royal communiqué could not mask the weight of its meaning. His children, Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana, had been removed from the line of succession. The words hit like a physical blow, reverberating through his chest, making it difficult to breathe. He sat alone in the quiet of his study at Frogmore Cottage, the walls lined with photographs capturing moments of joy with his family, moments now tainted by an unexpected and crushing decree. Each image, a birthday party, a school play, a family vacation, seemed suddenly vulnerable, as though the innocence of his children had been invaded by institutional power. He thought of Meghan. He thought of the countless times she had assured him that they were navigating the public scrutiny together, that the palace's walls could not touch the private sanctity of their family. But now, The reality was unavoidable. Decisions made in the ornate offices of Buckingham Palace had reached across continents, stripping his children of a status they had been born into, a status that was not just symbolic but carried weight, expectations, and a connection to history that now felt severed. Harry's phone buzzed incessantly, messages piling up from advisors, family members, and friends, each one carrying a mix of sympathy, instructions, and speculation. He ignored the notifications, his mind fixated on the injustice he perceived. This was more than a procedural adjustment. For years, he had endured criticisms, media smears, and public judgment for choices that should have been private. But this felt different. This crossed the line from public commentary to direct intervention in the lives of his children, and it awakened a fury that Harry could not contain. Inside the palace, Meghan had already been informed. Reports suggest that she learned of the decision hours before Harry did, being briefed in a controlled environment to manage the initial emotional impact. When the news reached her, she was reportedly in tears, her composure fractured by the realization that the institution she had married into could act with such unilateral force, disregarding the humanity of her children. For her, it was not just an affront to her family, but to her identity as a mother. The conversations that followed between Harry and Meghan were tense, layered with frustration, fear, and the struggle to chart a path forward in a situation that seemed designed to leave them powerless. Harry's immediate reaction was a blend of shock and calculated anger. He knew that public outrage alone would not be enough. This required strategy. His first call was to his closest advisors, individuals who had guided him through previous media storms and legal battles. "We need to understand every angle," he reportedly said, his voice tight with tension. "We need to know the authority, the precedent, the timing, and most importantly, how to protect our children." It was a measured statement, but behind it lay the raw emotional response of a father unwilling to accept what he saw as an unjust attack on the lives of his offspring. Legal counsel was contacted immediately, analyzing centuries of royal statutes, letters patent, and parliamentary acts to determine whether there was any recourse. The challenge was immense. The monarchy operates on conventions, traditions, and historical documents that rarely have clear pathways for modern dispute resolution. Council examined every nuance of the decree, debating whether language such as unresolved controversies could be legally contested or if it was a deliberate shield against any appeal. It was a complex web, combining constitutional law, royal precedent, and the very human element of intent and interpretation. At the same time, the couple began considering the narrative they might present to the public. Media strategy had always been a battleground for Harry and Meghan, but this was unlike anything before. They needed to protect the privacy of their children, counteract misinterpretations, and maintain a position of dignity and authority without fueling further controversy. Every word spoken, every social media post, every interview would be scrutinized with microscopic precision. It was an intricate dance, assert enough to protect their children, but not so much that it invited punitive retaliation or inflamed public opinion. Harry's thoughts continually returned to the children. He imagined Archie waking up and asking why his name was no longer recognized among future monarchs, why the world had suddenly shifted in ways he could not understand. He thought of Lilibet, a toddler too young to grasp the concept of succession, yet whose life would be shaped by whispers, media narratives, and the invisible weight of exclusion. For Harry, these were not abstract concepts. They were real, immediate, and emotionally unbearable. Protecting their innocence became an obsession, guiding every decision he made in the immediate hours after the announcement. The palace, meanwhile, was executing its internal response with precision. Senior advisors monitored communications, coordinated with press officers, and assessed potential reactions from the global media. Every leak, every social media post, and every private conversation was scrutinized. They knew the announcement would spark debate, and they were prepared to manage it, leveraging the authority of the king and the formality of the statement to maintain control. Yet even within these walls, whispers of internal disagreement circulated. Some courtiers expressed concern that the timing and phrasing of the decision could provoke unprecedented backlash, while others maintained that firmness was necessary to uphold the monarchy's image and tradition. Harry's reaction was amplified by the support network he relied on outside the palace. Friends, confidants, and close family members offered both emotional support and practical advice. Conversations ranged from the philosophical, discussing the morality and ethics of the monarchy, to the tactical, considering potential legal avenues, media responses, and diplomatic implications. These discussions were intense, often stretching late into the night, reflecting a combination of urgency and emotional exhaustion. Harry's own emotional state oscillated between anger, frustration, and a profound sense of protective responsibility. In the first 24 hours following the announcement, it became clear that this was more than a domestic dispute within the royal family. The situation had become international news, dominating headlines, trending on social media, and provoking commentary from leaders, journalists, and public figures worldwide. The scale of scrutiny was overwhelming, a constant reminder that private decisions within the palace could have immediate and far-reaching public consequences. For Harry, this added an additional layer of stress, the need to navigate not only the emotional fallout within his family, but also the global optics of their response. The emotional intensity of the situation was compounded by the media narrative. Sensationalist headlines framed the removal of Archie and Lilibet as punitive, framing Harry and Meghan as victims of a rigid institution unwilling to tolerate independence or deviation from tradition. Analysis and commentary ranged from measured constitutional debates to highly emotional condemnations, each contributing to an atmosphere of heightened tension. For Harry, reading these articles was simultaneously validating and distressing. They confirmed the injustice he perceived, but also amplified the pressure to respond effectively and protectively. Amid the chaos, Harry's protective instincts were absolute. He began drafting private statements, coordinating with legal counsel and media advisors to ensure that any public response would reinforce his role as a father defending his children while maintaining composure and dignity. He also prioritized family conversations, ensuring that Meghan and their closest confidants were aligned on messaging, strategy, and emotional support. These early hours were a crucible, combining legal analysis, media strategy, and emotional processing into a single, relentless focus on safeguarding his children's future. Yet even as he strategized, Harry could not escape the personal grief that accompanied the announcement. The monarchy, which had been a source of both pride and pressure throughout his life, had now taken a step that felt deeply personal, almost punitive. The line of succession, once a symbol of legacy and history, had been altered, and the responsibility for navigating this new reality fell squarely on his shoulders. He felt the weight of centuries of expectation, the eyes of the public, and the scrutiny of history converging in that single moment, creating an emotional burden unlike anything he had experienced before. This chapter of the story captures the raw, unfiltered reality of Harry's experience. The shock of receiving the announcement, the immediate and complex emotional response, and the urgent, protective drive that consumed him in the hours that followed. It sets the stage for the difficult decisions, public statements, and private reckonings that would define the coming days, weeks, and months. It is a portrait of a father confronting an institution, navigating the impossible intersection of family, tradition, and public expectation, all while seeking to shield the innocence of those he loves most. The moment Meghan heard the news, the world seemed to tilt beneath her. Though she had been warned by aides that major developments could occur, nothing could have fully prepared her for the reality that her children had been stripped of their place in the line of succession. She sat in the quiet of her office, the soft California sunlight streaming through the windows, juxtaposing the chaos that had erupted within her heart. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, yet she forced herself to remain composed, understanding that every reaction, every movement, every word could be scrutinized and weaponized by both the public and the press. Her first instinct was shock, swiftly followed by an overwhelming sense of injustice. She thought of Archie Harrison, her firstborn, with his bright eyes, inquisitive mind, and boundless energy, and of Lilibet Diana, whose laughter could light up any room despite her tender age. The thought that their futures had been altered by a distant decree, issued by a monarchy she had once pledged loyalty to, ignited a profound sense of betrayal. Meghan felt as though the very foundation of her family had been shaken, and she realized immediately that this was not just an abstract political maneuver. It was a deeply personal attack on her role as a mother and protector. As the initial shock subsided, Meghan's mind shifted into high gear. She was no stranger to navigating public scrutiny and crisis management. Her entire adult life had been defined by carefully balancing private identity and public perception. Yet this was unprecedented. Never before had an institution acted in such a way that so directly impacted her children. She immediately began outlining steps, both strategic and personal, to regain a sense of control. This was about more than reputation or image. It was about safeguarding her family, asserting agency, and ensuring that Archie and Lilibet were shielded from both emotional harm and public speculation. Her communications team was summoned, working alongside legal advisors to analyze every possible avenue of response. They meticulously reviewed the language of the palace statement, scrutinizing every word and phrase for legal implications, loopholes, or inconsistencies. Unresolved controversies became the focal point of their investigation, a phrase so deliberately vague that it seemed designed to provoke speculation while avoiding accountability. Meghan recognized immediately that public perception could not be left to chance. Without a carefully orchestrated response, the narrative would be dominated by speculation, misinterpretation, and potentially damaging misinformation. While legal and media strategies were being constructed, Meghan also had to confront her own emotional response. Reports from close friends suggest that she experienced a complex mix of emotions: anger at the institution, frustration at the lack of consultation, fear for her children's emotional well-being, and a deep-seated sense of betrayal. Each feeling was intense, raw, and relentless, yet she understood that outward displays of emotion would be scrutinized, politicized, and potentially used against her. Meghan's response had to be controlled, deliberate, and effective, even while her inner world churned with uncertainty and outrage. The struggle for control was immediate. Meghan understood that if she did not assert herself, the narrative would be shaped entirely by the palace and its allies. She began coordinating private statements with Harry, balancing the need to protect their children's privacy with the imperative to assert their position publicly. This required intense negotiation, both between her and Harry and with advisors who understood the precarious intersection of media, law, and public sentiment. Every decision, from the timing of social media posts to the phrasing of interviews, was calculated to achieve maximum effect without escalating tensions unnecessarily. Meanwhile, Meghan's team began monitoring media reactions globally. Journalists, commentators, and social media influencers dissected the announcement with almost feverish intensity, generating waves of speculation about the reasons behind the removal, the potential implications for Harry and Meghan, and the impact on their children's future. Meghan recognized that this was more than a public relations challenge. It was a battle for narrative control. Every article, every tweet, and every broadcast segment had the potential to shape perception, influence allies and detractors alike, and determine the course of public sympathy. At the same time, Meghan's personal support network became crucial. Friends, confidants, and mentors offered guidance, perspective, and reassurance. They emphasized the importance of maintaining composure, protecting the children, and asserting agency in a situation where traditional power structures seemed to work against her. Meghan leaned on these advisors not only for practical advice, but also for emotional support, as the weight of public scrutiny and private responsibility threatened to overwhelm her. Internally, Meghan grappled with questions of fairness, justice, and legacy. She reflected on her journey into the royal family, the scrutiny she had endured, and the high expectations that had been placed upon her. The removal of her children from the line of succession was more than an affront. It was a challenge to her values, her vision for her family, and her ability to protect those she loved most. In those private moments, she recognized that the battle ahead would require resilience, intelligence, and a careful balance between assertiveness and discretion. The couple also had to consider the long-term implications for Archie and Lilibet. Beyond legal and media strategies, Meghan's concern was fundamentally maternal. She contemplated how to explain the situation to children who were too young to fully understand the concept of succession, monarchy, or privilege. She understood that while the technical ramifications were significant, the emotional impact could be profound and lasting. Preparing her children to navigate this new reality without fear, confusion, or resentment became a central concern, guiding every decision and action in the immediate aftermath. As Meghan strategized, she also recognized the broader implications for public perception. The monarchy's decision, while procedural, would inevitably be interpreted as a statement about Harry and Meghan's behavior, their values, and their relationship with the institution. To counteract potential negative framing, she planned carefully curated communications that would highlight the innocence of her children, the dedication of their parents, and the ethical imperative to separate children from institutional disputes. Every interview, statement, and interaction was designed to reinforce this narrative, emphasizing compassion, justice, and protection of the vulnerable. The struggle for control extended beyond media and messaging. Meghan considered legal options that could challenge the decision, either by questioning the authority under which it had been made or by seeking accommodations for the children's future. Legal counsel debated potential precedents, historical documentation, and avenues within both British and international frameworks. The complexity of the situation was staggering. Few had ever confronted a case in which private familial decisions intersected so directly with centuries-old traditions, constitutional ambiguity, and the unyielding gaze of global media. In these early hours and days, Meghan's response was characterized by a delicate blend of emotional resilience and strategic precision. She oscillated between grief and determination, private reflection and public assertion, maternal instinct and political calculation. Every action was informed by the dual imperatives of protecting her children and asserting agency within a system designed to limit it. The removal of Archie and Lilibet from succession was not simply a legal or procedural act. It was a catalyst that demanded immediate, multifaceted, and sustained engagement from Meghan, forcing her to confront the full weight of institutional power while maintaining her family's cohesion and dignity. Ultimately, Meghan's response was a study in controlled intensity. She moved with purpose, balancing emotion with strategy, private grief with public messaging, and maternal instinct with calculated diplomacy. The struggle for control was not simply about narrative. It was about safeguarding her children, asserting her rights, and maintaining a sense of agency in a situation where so much had been stripped away. The stakes were enormous, the challenges unprecedented, and the implications enduring. By the end of the first week, it was evident that Meghan's response would shape not only public perception but also the ongoing dynamics within the royal family. Her actions, combined with Harry's protective strategies, set the stage for a confrontation that was both deeply personal and institutionally significant. This chapter of the story reveals the intensity, complexity, and strategic foresight required for a mother to navigate an unprecedented royal decision while maintaining the emotional and psychological well-being of her children. The announcement that Meghan's children had been removed from the line of succession rippled through the royal household like a shockwave, reaching every corner of the palace with astonishing speed. Staff members whispered nervously in hallways that had once resonated only with ceremonial decorum, their voices carrying tension that had never existed before. Courtiers, aides, and advisors alike tried to process the news, each wrestling with the implications, the optics, and the personal loyalties that were now under unprecedented strain. The palace, a symbol of stoicism and unyielding tradition, had suddenly become a theater of human reaction, fraught with subtle yet significant fractures in its once unified facade. King Charles, at the center of this decision, moved swiftly yet calculatedly. Those close to him report that his demeanor was a mixture of resolve and unease. On one hand, he was convinced that the removal was necessary to preserve the integrity of the succession and to assert his authority in a time of growing public scrutiny. On the other hand, the magnitude of the action, stripping two young children of a role they had held from birth, carried consequences that extended far beyond immediate protocol. It was a move that risked alienating not only Harry and Meghan, but also large segments of the public who had grown sympathetic to the Sussexes in recent years. Inside the palace, tension was palpable. Advisors and senior staff were divided, some championing the king's decisive action as a necessary reinforcement of tradition, while others worried about the fallout. Many feared that the move would be interpreted as a personal attack rather than a procedural adjustment, especially given the global attention surrounding the Sussexes. Whispers circulated that internal memos had been drafted to anticipate media questions, potential leaks, and the likely social media storm. Yet even the most meticulous planning could not account for the sheer unpredictability of human reaction. Prince William, confronted with the news, experienced a complex and deeply personal response. Sources indicate that he struggled to reconcile his role as a brother with his responsibilities as a senior royal. William reportedly recognized that the decision was aligned with long-term considerations of monarchy and succession, yet the emotional impact on Harry and Meghan was impossible to ignore. Private conversations in the palace corridors, where no one else could hear, revealed a man torn between. Private conversations in the palace corridors, where no one else could hear, revealed a man torn between familial loyalty and institutional duty. He contemplated the ramifications not only for his brother's family, but also for his own children, who would inevitably be caught in the public discourse and speculation that would follow. Princess Anne, known for her unflinching sense of duty, reportedly expressed measured support for the move, emphasizing the importance of clarity and protocol. Yet even she acknowledged the delicate nature of the situation, understanding that emotional considerations were inseparable from institutional responsibilities. Her approach was pragmatic. The decision had been made, and the challenge now lay in managing both its implementation and the narrative that would inevitably accompany it. Anne's influence within the household meant that her endorsement, or even quiet acquiescence, carried significant weight, shaping the internal alignment of other key staff members and advisors. Behind the scenes, courtiers who had served the family for decades were scrambling to understand their own positions. Longtime aides, accustomed to operating within clear boundaries of duty and decorum, suddenly found themselves navigating a landscape that was shifting beneath their feet. Loyalties were tested, alliances quietly reformed, and whispered debates emerged over the appropriate tone of communication to the wider public. Some argued for a firm, unapologetic stance, emphasizing that tradition must prevail regardless of personal sentiment. Others advocated for subtle gestures of empathy toward the Sussexes, aware that the optics of perceived cruelty could be damaging both publicly and politically. The household's communications team was thrust into overdrive, drafting press releases, preparing for potential interviews, and anticipating leaks required rapid coordination and precision. Even minor missteps could amplify scrutiny or create unintended narratives. Each word chosen had to be weighed against potential interpretations, legal considerations, and public reaction. Internal emails reflected the extraordinary level of stress within the palace, as staff meticulously debated phrasing, timing, and messaging strategy, attempting to balance firmness with sensitivity while recognizing the extraordinary scrutiny from international media. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, the royal family grappled with internal divisions that had long been dormant. While protocol dictated unity, personal relationships complicated matters. Some members viewed the move as necessary, while others privately questioned its fairness and timing. This divergence of opinion was magnified by the global stage on which the palace now operated. Every decision, private conversation, and reaction risked being leaked, scrutinized, and sensationalized. Tensions, once contained within the insulated walls of Buckingham Palace, were now amplified by social media, international press, and public commentary. Harry and Meghan, aware of the internal divisions, anticipated that they were not merely facing an institution. They were facing individuals whose loyalties could influence both immediate outcomes and long-term narratives. Meghan, in particular, understood the intricate web of palace politics and the subtle ways in which advisors and courtiers could sway decisions, leak information, or shape perceptions. She meticulously tracked interactions, noting nuances in tone, body language, and access to decision-makers, recognizing that the internal dynamics of the household could be as consequential as the formal pronouncement itself. The internal struggle extended to day-to-day operations within the palace. Schedules, ceremonial planning, and family events were suddenly imbued with heightened significance. Staff had to carefully navigate the physical and social spaces where members of the royal family interacted, mindful that even seemingly mundane encounters could be interpreted as signals of loyalty, dissent, or favoritism. Dining arrangements, seating orders, and the smallest gestures, handshakes, glances, or tones of voice, were now laden with political significance, requiring constant vigilance and an acute awareness of perception. Reports from insiders reveal that some courtiers attempted to mediate tensions, serving as quiet intermediaries between factions. These intermediaries recognized the high stakes, understanding that unresolved friction could escalate into public controversy or internal sabotage. Negotiations were delicate, often conducted in hushed corridors or during private meetings, where subtle diplomacy and personal influence became essential tools. The palace, though centuries old and steeped in hierarchy, suddenly required a level of crisis management that tested every individual's skill, discretion, and judgment. Despite the formal unity presented to the public, the household was in a state of careful agitation. Every conversation carried weight, every interaction was scrutinized, and every decision risked unintended consequences. The removal of Archie and Lilibet from succession had not merely altered the official line. It had disrupted the delicate equilibrium of relationships, trust, and influence within the royal family. In this environment, the internal divisions became a crucible, revealing both the strengths and vulnerabilities of an institution often perceived as monolithic and unyielding. The ripple effects extended beyond the immediate household. External advisors, legal experts, and members of the media closely monitoring palace dynamics quickly picked up on the subtle cues of internal tension. Analysts debated the implications of the decision, speculated on fractures in the royal family, and predicted how these divisions might influence public perception and the monarchy's long-term stability. Each leaked conversation, each hinted disagreement, and each cautious intervention became fodder for international headlines, amplifying the stakes and further complicating the internal dynamics of the palace. By the end of the first week following the announcement, the royal household had transformed into a complex web of tension, strategy, and careful maneuvering. Members were navigating an unprecedented intersection of protocol, personal loyalty, and global scrutiny. The internal divisions were no longer subtle whispers. They had become an undercurrent that would shape every interaction, every public appearance, and every strategic decision for the foreseeable future. The palace, though outwardly composed, was navigating a crisis that blended centuries-old tradition with modern media pressures, personal relationships, and the very real emotional consequences for two young children. The stage was now set for the next series of confrontations, negotiations, and public narratives. Every individual in the household, from senior royals to long-standing staff, understood that their actions or inactions would carry consequences. Loyalties were tested, strategies formulated, and the delicate balance between duty and personal connection became an ever-present concern. The removal of Archie and Lilibet from the line of succession was more than a procedural decision. It was a catalyst for deep, enduring shifts within the royal household, revealing fissures that would challenge the very heart of the institution. The moment news broke that Meghan Markle's children, Archie and Lilibet, had been removed from the royal line of succession, the world seemed to pause, collectively holding its breath before erupting into a storm of commentary, speculation, and outrage. Social media platforms exploded with reactions ranging from disbelief to fury, the hashtags multiplying by the second as users around the globe expressed confusion, indignation, and a sense of injustice. The news had transcended national boundaries, hitting not only British media, but international outlets with a force that few anticipated. In a matter of hours, what was a palace announcement became a global phenomenon, a spectacle that was both a news story and a cultural lightning rod. The initial public response was electric. On Twitter, thousands of users voiced their shock, framing the decision as an affront not just to Meghan and Harry, but to the idea of fairness itself. Memes circulated, editorialized images and videos of the young children flooded feeds, and commentary dissecting every nuance of palace protocol began trending worldwide. Many questioned the morality of removing young children from succession for what was framed as procedural reasons, arguing that they were innocent and should not bear the weight of adult disputes. Hashtags calling for clarification, appeals to common decency, and comparisons to historical precedents flooded timelines, creating a maelstrom of public pressure that even the most seasoned royal observers had never encountered. Traditional media outlets quickly followed suit, recognizing that the story would dominate news cycles for days, if not weeks. Newspapers, television channels, and online publications scrambled to provide analysis, each attempting to strike a balance between factual reporting and sensational storytelling. Headlines varied from measured descriptions of procedural shifts to more dramatic portrayals that emphasized family betrayal, scandal, and intrigue. International media added their own layers, interpreting the story through cultural lenses that ranged from fascination with the British monarchy to outright criticism of perceived institutional cruelty. The coverage became a feeding frenzy, with outlets competing to uncover details, commentaries, and insider insights that could set them apart in a saturated news environment. Royal commentators, analysts, and insiders began weighing in almost immediately, many offering deeply conflicting perspectives. Some framed the move as a necessary assertion of tradition and authority, suggesting that it reinforced the seriousness of succession rules and protected the monarchy from further complications. Others, however, emphasized the human element, highlighting the emotional toll on the children, the disruption to family bonds, and the public perception of a monarchy at odds with modern values of empathy and transparency. Television panels, podcasts, and digital forums buzzed with debate, each contributor adding layers of speculation and analysis, often drawing on unnamed sources or leaked information that further fueled public curiosity and outrage. The public's fascination was intensified by the global narrative surrounding Harry and Meghan. Their departure from senior royal duties had already been a source of intense scrutiny and mixed sentiment, positioning them as both victims and instigators of palace tensions in the eyes of many. Now, with the removal of their children from succession, their status had evolved into something even more contentious. Supporters rallied to their defense, viewing the move as an attempt to marginalize them and their family, while critics seized the moment to highlight perceived missteps, controversies, or failures. This duality of interpretation created a polarized environment, one in which emotions ran high and rational discourse was often drowned out by anger, loyalty, or sensationalism. Media outlets did not merely report the news. They created narratives that shaped the way millions understood it. Photo galleries of the children circulated widely, often accompanied by captions that emphasized their innocence and vulnerability. Videos of past public appearances, interviews, and engagements were repurposed to underscore their humanity and the perceived harshness of the decision. Opinion pieces debated the ethics of the move, contextualized it historically, and speculated on the long-term consequences for the monarchy, the Sussexes, and the public perception of the royal family. Every angle, every interpretation, and every emotional appeal was magnified by the speed and reach of modern media, ensuring that there was no single version of the story, only an ever-expanding tapestry of narratives competing for attention. Social media platforms, in particular, became arenas of both debate and spectacle. Users created content ranging from heartfelt support to scathing criticism, often blending personal opinion with commentary on institutional failures. Viral posts analyzed family photos, dissected public statements, and speculated on motives, creating a sense of participatory journalism in which the audience became co-creators of the unfolding story. Influencers, celebrities, and public figures weighed in, further amplifying the attention and adding layers of cultural commentary that blurred the lines between news, opinion, and entertainment. Memes, GIFs, and viral videos contributed to a digital ecosystem in which emotional resonance often outweighed factual precision, feeding a frenzy that was at once chaotic and mesmerizing. The controversy extended beyond the digital world into public demonstrations and commentary in traditional spaces. Commentators on television, radio, and even parliamentary debates referenced the decision, exploring its implications for both the monarchy and public trust. In Britain, Newspapers ran editorials questioning the fairness of removing children from the succession, while internationally, similar discussions emerged in contexts as diverse as Australia, Canada, and the United States. Legal experts debated the procedural legitimacy of the move, historical scholars examined precedents, and psychologists highlighted the potential emotional consequences for young children thrust into the center of a global debate. The intensity of the coverage transformed the story from a palace matter into a worldwide conversation about family, power, and accountability. The public reaction was not monolithic. While many expressed sympathy for the children and outrage at the decision, others supported the palace's assertion of protocol and the reinforcement of traditional structures. Some argued that succession rules were sacrosanct and that the monarchy's credibility depended on strict adherence, even at the expense of personal relationships. This division created a polarized discourse in which every public statement by Harry, Meghan, or other royal figures was dissected for meaning, intention, and alignment with perceived sides of the debate. Media coverage, social commentary, and public opinion reinforced each other in a feedback loop, amplifying the emotional stakes and the intensity of scrutiny. As the media frenzy escalated, leaks and insider revelations began to surface. Anonymous sources claimed to have knowledge of internal communications, private reactions, and behind-the-scenes discussions, offering tantalizing glimpses into the palace's handling of the situation. These revelations were often contradictory, suggesting either deep divisions or carefully orchestrated messaging, depending on the narrative being advanced. Each leak fueled speculation, further entrenching the public's perception of intrigue, conflict, and high-stakes drama. Journalists and commentators eagerly chased leads, seeking exclusive angles or confirmations, creating a hyper-competitive environment in which speed and sensationalism often outpaced verification. The combination of traditional and social media scrutiny created an unprecedented level of attention on Harry and Meghan, effectively turning every interaction, statement, and gesture into a headline. Analysts noted that the speed of information flow and the intensity of emotional investment among the public made the situation volatile, unpredictable, and increasingly complex to manage. The palace's communications team faced extraordinary pressure, attempting to coordinate messages, address leaks, and anticipate both public and media reactions. Each press release, interview, and social media post became a strategic decision, with far-reaching implications for public perception, reputation management, and the institution's long-term legitimacy. Amid the chaos, Harry and Meghan's response became a focal point. Their statements, interviews, and social media activity were scrutinized for tone, content, and implications, each generating waves of reaction. Supporters applauded measured responses as dignified and protective of their family, while critics interpreted them as confrontational or opportunistic. The intensity of the attention underscored the unprecedented nature of the situation. A single family's private affairs had become the epicenter of global debate, and every action or omission contributed to a narrative that was increasingly difficult to control. Public opinion, divided and fervent, reflected both the emotional and cultural dimensions of the story. Some saw the removal as a necessary act of adherence to tradition, while others perceived it as an act of cruelty, highlighting the tension between protocol and compassion. The polarized discourse manifested in countless ways: letters to editors, online petitions, social media campaigns, opinion polls, and widespread commentary across news networks. This collective response emphasized the extraordinary visibility and symbolic power of the monarchy, illustrating how a single decision could provoke emotional engagement and moral debate on a global scale. By the end of the first week following the announcement, the media frenzy had not abated. If anything, it had intensified. Every interaction, every report, every analysis seemed to feed the fire, creating a self-sustaining cycle of attention and speculation. Public engagement was unprecedented, and the palace, the royal family, and the Sussexes were all operating under extraordinary scrutiny. The decision to remove Archie and Lilibet from succession had transformed a procedural action into a worldwide spectacle, one that highlighted both the enduring fascination with the British monarchy and the challenges of navigating personal decisions under global observation. The public outcry also had ripple effects beyond media coverage. Political figures, social commentators, and international observers weighed in, often tying the decision to broader questions of governance, accountability, and social values. Debates emerged regarding the monarchy's relevance, the balance between tradition and modernity, and the ethical responsibilities of public figures toward their families. Educational institutions, cultural organizations, and community groups even referenced the story as a case study in ethics, public perception, and institutional power. The consequences of the palace's decision, intended to reinforce protocol, had instead catalyzed conversations across virtually every sector of society, illustrating the unique cultural and symbolic weight carried by the British royal family. Even within the media itself, internal divisions emerged. Some outlets prioritized sensationalism and rapid dissemination of content, while others focused on in-depth analysis, historical context, or human interest angles. Journalists debated the ethics of coverage, the potential impact on children, and the responsibilities of reporting in a story so. In the quiet hours of the night, away from the glaring scrutiny of cameras and the relentless chatter of social media, Prince Harry found himself engulfed in a storm that was both public and deeply personal. The palace announcement regarding Archie and Lilibet had not only ignited global debate, but had struck at the core of his private life, leaving him grappling with emotions that ranged from disbelief and anger to profound sorrow. Harry, who had long navigated the intense pressures of royal life, now confronted a new dimension of vulnerability, the realization that decisions made in corridors of power had far-reaching